Strategy guides used to be more than just instructions. They were artifacts. They captured how players understood games at a specific moment in time, before wikis, data mining, and patch notes flattened everything into one central source of perfect knowledge. And nowhere is that clearer than when you put two guides for the same game side by side and realize that one of them actually understands the game, while the other is just going through the motions. I've spent a lot of time on this channel so far singing Versus Book's praises to high heaven, to the point where it almost feels like bias. The first 3 strategy guides I covered were all officially licensed works from Sega and Nintendo, but this video marks the 3rd time in a row I've talked about a Versus Books guide, and specifically one of their unauthorized ones. This was something they did a lot back in their early years, when they were still a relatively small startup of gaming hobbyists without the pull needed to secure official backing from major game publishers. That phase didn't last very long, though. Within about a year, Versus Book's reputation had grown enough that companies like Nintendo were actively contracting them to produce official guides. So, at least as far as this channel goes, this marks the last time we'll be looking at an unofficial Versus Books release. Unofficial strategy guides are something you almost never see today unless you're actively looking for them. A few years ago, I stumbled across one for the Link's Awakening remake that remains a complete mystery to me. No branding, no publisher name, I don't even think it credits an author. I bought it purely out of curiosity because it genuinely felt like it manifested out of thin air, like someone printed out a Game FAQs guide and slapped a paperback cover on it. But really, the disappearance of unofficial guides is just a symptom of strategy guides as a whole becoming a largely dead industry. Like so many things, the internet rendered them mostly unnecessary. Prima and Piggyback are basically the only companies left that specialize in game guides, and even then, only the biggest, most expensive AAA releases get them anymore. Once upon a time, though, this industry was hyper-competitive to the point of oversaturation. Big-name games could easily have 2 or 3 official guides, and for every official one, there might be 2 or 3 unofficial ones. These days, it's usually just one guide per game, if that, which makes unofficial guides something you'd have to go out of your way to find. And honestly, I'm not even sure why you would when game FAQs and wikis exist for free. But back in the late 90s, when it came to unofficial strategy guides, Versus Books was king. I've already put their Final Fantasy VII and Resident Evil 2 guides on pedestals as gold standards for walkthrough design. And their FF7 book famously took potshots at their biggest competitor, BradyGames, whose official FF7 guide was severely lacking by comparison. And for the first time on this channel, I can actually put 2 guides for the same game side by side. And in this case, both of them are unofficial. For Metal Gear Solid, I own both the Versus Books and BradyGames guides, and while BradyGames was a huge name in the strategy guide scene for a good decade, their MGS guide is completely unauthorized. Konami only gave official approval to one company for MGS, Millennium Publications, an independent 90s comic publisher that briefly dipped into game guides before shuttering their doors in 2000. So if BradyGames wanted to cash in on MGS's massive popularity, they had to go off book this time. That put them squarely on Versus Books' home turf, and given the FF7 scoreboard, that was not a good position to be in. And honestly, nothing illustrates just how good Versus Books was quite like just looking at their competition. The Versus Books guide delivers exactly what you'd expect if you've seen my previous videos. Clear, detailed gameplay information packed into dense page layouts where absolutely nothing is wasted. In this guide, every area of the game is broken into 3 distinct sections. A briefing, which outlines general goals and information, mission data, which presents multiple strategies depending on how you like to play, and occasionally a tips section that highlights more obscure tricks you can try. It makes the book incredibly easy to navigate. You always know exactly where to look for the kind of information you need. All of this is supported by Versus Books' trademark hand-drawn maps, this time rendered in CG, meticulously recreated to match the in-game layouts as closely as possible. Compare that to the BradyGames guide. Sure, it has more total pages, but it also uses larger text, leaves a lot of empty space, and overall just feels barren next to Versus Books. The game areas aren't cleanly segmented, and pages often break arbitrarily, sometimes even mid-sentence. Where Versus Books gives each area a clear 2 or 3 page spread with its own header, BradyGames just splits pages whenever. It's less visually interesting and harder to read. Random tip boxes are scattered throughout without much rhyme or reason, which is especially noticeable when contrasted with how deliberately Versus Books plans every layout. Case in point, the Communications Tower page, where Versus Books even acknowledges that the unusually tall map meant that the rest of the page's layout had to suffer as a result. That said, I will give BradyGames one small win here. I actually prefer their maps. They're much simpler, and while some might see that as a downside, I think it makes them easier to parse at a glance, especially when you're quickly checking item locations. Once you get into the actual walkthroughs and strategies, though, it stops being a contest entirely. Versus Books is more thorough, better written, and infinitely more entertaining. As always, their MGS guide has a strong, distinctive voice, full of dry wit that makes it enjoyable to read even outside the context of actively playing the game. They poke fun at Snake's weird hand motion when his life gauge levels up. They comment on how strange the PlayStation in the lab looks, suggesting it might actually be a 3DO or a Net Yarose, which itself is a deep cut. They take shots at Senator Lieberman, referring to Joe Lieberman and his role in the early anti-video game violence campaigns of the 90s that eventually led to the creation of the ESRB. And in what is probably amusing only to me and about 6 other people, they reference, of all things, Filler Bunny, a joke character from a 90s comic book by the creator of Invader Zim. Crucially though, none of this humor ever gets in the way of the actual guidance. Nearly every expert-level MGS tactic you'd expect is already here. Things like using Nikitas against Sniper Wolf or punting guards off the cargo elevator. They cover the alternate Psychomantis strategy, and even tactics for beating him without any tricks at all if you're up for the challenge. They even point out something I somehow never noticed in my dozens of playthroughs. The hand dryers in the bathrooms can thaw frozen rations. It's wildly impractical since your rations typically won't freeze until you're way past that room, but I never even considered that this would be possible, so kudos to them. They also continue Versus Books' long-standing commitment to avoiding story spoilers, a tenet they practically founded themselves on back with their FF7 guide. Just like their RE2 guide stops before the train boss, the MGS guide doesn't cover anything past the Metal Gear Rex fight, preserving the game's final twists. Their VR mission coverage is especially stellar. While the main campaign isn't terribly difficult, the VR missions are where MGS really shines mechanically. Versus Books provides full maps, routing diagrams, and distinct strategies for sneaking versus shooting challenges. These strategies are cater-built for not only clearing the stages, but getting the top score as well, and they even list your target times right alongside the text, making it clear what you should be aiming for. Following this guide, I managed to get top scores on most stages within just a few attempts, and I only had to look elsewhere for alternate tactics a handful of times. Now, compare all of that to the BradyGames guide. It's rote, mechanical, and painfully basic. Paragraph after paragraph of go to room X, perform action Y, pick up item Z. The strategies aren't clever, and in several cases, they just give plain bad advice. They claim grenades and Nikitas are never worth using. They call the handkerchief useless despite it having a very specific in-game purpose. They never realize that you can use the mine detector to find the PAL card. They never suggest using Nikitas on Sniper Wolf, and their Vulcan Raven and Metal Gear Rex strategies are borderline suicidal on higher difficulties. They also, for some reason, insist on micromanaging every single instance of backtracking with single-sentence, room-by-room instructions that feel copy-pasted. It is redundant as all hell. Worse still, the guide frequently gets things outright wrong. They claim it's impossible to survive Ocelot's third torture session. It isn't. They say you need a minimum of 3 playthroughs to unlock extreme difficulty. You don't. Both of these guides appear to have been written using the Japanese version of the game, something Versus Books explicitly acknowledges, and the Japanese version lacked difficulty selection at all. But if BradyGames was also using the Japanese version, where did their difficulty information even come from? And then there's their claim about a supposed C roll that can be unlocked in the demo theater. Yeah, data for unused C and D rolls exist in the game's files, sure, but if that was their source for this info, why only mention one of them? It's baffling. Versus Books also goes far beyond expectations with bonus content, including detailed coverage of the secret ghost photos, one of my favorite absurd Easter eggs in all of gaming. They got a few locations a little off, but even attempting this level of coverage at the time was impressive. BradyGames, by contrast, lists maybe a half a dozen, and not even with any screenshots, and calls it a day. Versus Books, in an attempt to openly compete with Millennium's guide, also dedicates 10 full pages plus some additional asides to showcasing real-world weapons, technology, and organizations featured in the game. They conducted interviews and gathered real photos for this section. This is the kind of extra effort that justifies a guide's price tag beyond basic walkthroughs. BradyGames offers nothing comparable to this, just standard controls, character bios, and plot summaries. You know, the type of stuff you could already find in the instruction manual. And in complete contrast to Versus books, BradyGames does not give two shits about spoilers. Huge chunks of the walkthrough are just beat-by-beat cutscene recaps. I've brought this up in prior videos, and I will repeat it until I'm blue in the face. Walkthroughs do not and should not need to be plot summaries. The player is already experiencing the story firsthand. Do not ruin that. Walkthroughs are there to provide guidance and instruction, not to act as a Wikipedia synopsis. What really astounded me, though, was how brazen these spoilers are. If you read ahead in this walkthrough at all, then basically every major twist is blown. Character profiles will coyly tease mystery in one paragraph and then immediately dump full backstories in the next. And then, hilariously, the one thing they refuse to spoil is the post-credits stinger. Like, oh no, you'll have to play the game to find out. And it's like, my guy, you spoiled everything else. Why stop now? This is also especially egregious given that one major criticism of BradyGames' FF7 guide when compared to Versus books was that the BradyGames guide also spent entire pages at a time spoiling major story beats. Apparently, they learned nothing. These two books really are night and day. BradyGames isn't just less helpful than Versus books, it's also far more poorly organized, and in a way that constantly works against the reader. Versus books does everything it can to make use of every single inch of page space for something. Even when they don't have essential information to convey, they'll fill the gaps with fun little asides, creative ways to mess with guards, unhinged rants about the game's characters, or even photos showing off one of the author's personal Kojima collection. There's always something there, and it always feels intentional. BradyGames, by contrast, comes across like they were given a minimum page quota and were really struggling desperately to hit it. When Versus books has extra space, they use it to add personality or interesting tangents. When BradyGames has extra space, they fill it with nothing. BradyGames has a higher page count, but dramatically less substance. Sure, both books have the occasional typo or flub or whatever, every book does, but one of these clearly cared more than the other. And nowhere is that more apparent than in BradyGames' VR mission coverage. There are no maps, no diagrams, not even any screenshots, and the strategies they do provide seem solely concerned with getting you to the end of each level rather than helping you understand the stage or achieve a top score. It feels completely perfunctory, like an obligation they had to fulfill rather than a feature they actually cared about. It's almost sad how much they completely phoned this in. There is, quite frankly, no personality or creativity anywhere in this book. It's just rote by-the-numbers instructions from start to finish, delivered with zero enthusiasm or passion. Where the Versus books guide offers broad, flexible coverage that encourages experimentation and learning at your own pace, BradyGames grabs you by the hand and marches you through every inch of the game like a toddler. It seems to actively balk at the mere idea that you might want to deviate from the prescribed path or try anything unconventional. The end result is the first strategy guide I've covered on this channel that I genuinely did not like. What makes all these comparisons so stark isn't just that Versus books does a better job, it's why they do a better job. Their guide treats Metal Gear Solid as something worth understanding, experimenting with, and even poking fun at. BradyGames treats it like a checklist to be completed. And that difference between curiosity and obligation is something you can feel on every single page. Even Versus books didn't seem to take them seriously this time, even after all the trash talk they were doing during the FF7 days. In the Versus books guide, they explicitly name Millennium as their main competition, the guide they were trying to outdo. BradyGames doesn't even get a mention. Sorry, boys. Better luck next time.